Hey gang, so if you were just watching this with me a little bit ago, sorry, we had some technical difficulty. Everything happened at once, and alarms are going off on the phone and all kinds of noise in the house, so I'm starting it over, and hopefully this one works better. And if you can't hear me, let me know, okay? But we're going to jump right into Hebrews 11. Now, Hebrews 11 is a little different than what we've seen so far with Hebrews. Hebrews 11 is a testimony to those who had come before, showing their faith and their dedication, showing their commitment to God. And so what we've seen with up to this point in Hebrews is a comparison between God and others through Jesus, through Jesus and others, right? So that part of God. Like, are the angels bigger than Jesus? No, Jesus is better than the angels. Are the, prophets who have come before better than Jesus? No, Jesus is better than the prophets. Was Moses better? No, Jesus was better than Moses, right? It was kind of a back and forth where we are, who is helping people to understand in this time. Hebrews, in the sense, is a sermon. Hebrews is saying, well, Jesus is the best that you have available to you. This is a new tradition for you to move into. And it's kind of funny for us to think about because, Christianity's been around so long, it's hard for us to imagine that at one point it was the new kid on the block. At one point, this was a new religion that is being taught. And so Hebrews, the author who's writing this sermon, this letter, is kind of saying, hey, there's a lot available to you, but let me tell you what you can see in Jesus Christ. Let me tell you who he is. Let me tell you so that you can know and have faith yourself. Now, in Hebrews 11, they're going to take those who came before, names that you know, like Noah and Abraham, and show why actually they were on the same path that Jesus has laid out for us, that they had a sense of faith, that they had a sense of commitment, and kind of guide us into that commitment. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And I'm sorry if you were with us at first when we had the technical difficulty. We are going to kind of replay our steps, okay? Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. Now, what is a good reputation? A good reputation was that they were the kinds of people that helped their community, the kinds of people that cared about God, the kinds of people that sought to do what was right. So he's going to tell you about those, or she's going to tell you about those people so that we can learn to follow in their footsteps. There's lots of times in life that we have people that we look up to, that we are guided by. And these are the Hebrews 11 people, the people that knew what to do with God's love for them and showed us how to live into that love as well. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. So everything that is around you now, no matter what that is, the chair you're sitting in, the bed you sleep on, the food you're eating, at one point that came from God's imagination. There was nothing, and into nothing was everything, right? God created from nothing, from the void, from the chaos. God created beauty and life and hope and joy and people and creatures and creation, right? All of that was formed from nothingness. And so what the author is saying in that is that even these people who have come before are part of that creation line. They're part of that tradition leading to us. That we are part of the tradition of becoming. There's actually even a great theology book about that. The theology of becoming. What it means to have come from nothing. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up in heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him, before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God, and it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. So we've got two people. We've got Abel and we've got Enoch. Two names that you might know or you might not. They're Old Testament names. They're in our early part of the Bible, right, in that first section there. And what it's saying is even from the beginning, people were with God and trying to do what was right. Even from the beginning, we can learn something from those who came before us, who sought to do the right of God. All right, it was by faith. Now, here's a name you might know better. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, God condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. So Noah, yes, even Noah, had faith. Now, he may not have used that word faith. We don't see that word really into Christianity, right? But they're saying, but he did. He had faith to build an ark when it was just dry land. He had faith to hold forth into trusting, even though everybody said he was off his rocker. He trusted that he had the right thing, that he was hearing God. He trusted and had faith. And that's what led him to building an ark. That's what led him to collecting all those animals. That's what led him to trusting his family into God's hand. That they're saying we might not have heard the word faith in that section on Noah, but that's what it was. Let me give you a name for it, right? Let me give you the word for it so that you too can live into it. That's what the author's doing in Hebrews, giving us the word faith. Now, this is almost a game, right? You can almost go through Hebrews 11 and just underline all the time you hear the word faith or see the word faith, and you're going to find a lot of highlighting at the end of it, right? They're teaching us this new word. This word that for us seems so everyday anymore, right? I know girls that are named Faith, right? It's a commonplace word, but for them it wasn't. This was new. This was a new type of their faith and religion. There was a new type of their Christianity. It was a new type of their belief system. It was a new type of anything into the world, right? And so here they're saying, hey, wait, faith is not a new concept. It's been around. Let me show you. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, a nation with so many people that like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there was no way to count them. Abraham, if he hadn't had faith, if he hadn't trusted, if he hadn't walked with God, when God called upon him, when called forth into him, if he had not taken that step, then all those that would come after through his lineage would not exist. That his sons lead forth a whole new nation. And we know this true, right? We know that there were people who, think of all the millions of people who had to connect together to bring forth you, right? Think of all the genetics that had to occur before you existed, right? That's a reminding that this nation of Abraham, this Father Abraham, had many sons. Well, none of those sons would have existed if Abraham had not taken forth this next step, had not trusted, if Sarah had not opened herself to be a vessel for God, right? A literal vessel, I guess, in this sense. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised. So when they died, there was no sense of heaven, right? And we know this with the Jews, there isn't a sense of heaven. There is a sense of being buried with the ancestors, right? So they were trusting that something was coming, but they didn't get the same thing we do. We have a better step than Abraham had. We have a better step available for us than Noah had. You have a chance to trust the salvation of Jesus Christ, and thus by doing a commitment to him, by doing forth, making that statement of baptism, that you then are open to a whole new promise that they never had. You're open to salvation here on earth and in heaven. Now, they couldn't receive that point, right? Their faith was a promise of what was to come, but yours is a fulfillment of that promise when you step into making a commitment with Christ. All right. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back, but they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. That's a strange thing to think about, isn't it, right? That God said Isaac would be the entryway, and still Abraham said, okay, even if this is the promise fulfilled, I will turn even the promise over to God. I will turn even my legacy over to God. I will turn even my son over to God. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. because he had assumed Isaac would be gone, and then he was not. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future of his sons, Jacob and Esau. So see what's happening here? He's kind of giving us a genealogical lineage, right? Kind of our lineage, ours, to receive the faith of Jesus Christ. To see that people before have come, passing this on to us, passing their faith witness on to us. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. It was by faith, see? It was by faith. It was by faith. It was by faith. Almost a broken record. Intentionally so, though. It was by faith that Moses hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's commands. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasure of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt. Whoa, you're saying, what? Moses didn't know about Jesus? What is he talking about here? But they're saying maybe he did. Maybe this is all a foreshadowing of what's to come. Maybe in the beginning was the Word. And some people had a sense of it. And some people knew this and knew there was something better. So not only is Jesus greater than Moses, but maybe even Moses knew there was something greater coming. And they're going to go on in that section of Moses, and you can read that. You're going to see, again, though we jump to 29, it was by faith. This time who? The people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days, and the walls came crashing down. It was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Over and over, what if you went through the Old Testament yourself? What would be the stories that stood out to you of people who committed their lives to Christ, who committed their witness and testimony to the Lord? If you were to walk through, who stands out to you as somebody you want to walk in the footsteps of? Who stands out to you as somebody's legacy that you want to live out? That's what's happening here. Hebrews 11 author is saying, these are my 4 heroes. 4 as in 4 fathers, 4 mothers, right? Not just 4. These are the people that came before that I want to be like. Who are yours? In verse 32, it says, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets, so even more that stood out to them. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut their mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from the dead, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goat, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. He's saying here, one thing after another, look at these people who came before, who took whatever they had to face and did it for the glory of God. Kind of read that almost as if it's increasing. Read almost Hebrews 12:32 up to the end right there of that chapter. Just read it increasingly, more and more. Think of all those people that came before you who have loved God and are a witness to you. Maybe for you, it's your parents and your grandparents. Maybe for you, it's a pastor who taught you about God, or a teacher who taught you about God, some Sunday school teacher that made a difference. Maybe it's the neighbor down the street. Well, let's go in our Bible. Who else teaches you about God? Was it the disciples? Was it the prophets? Who else showed you about who God is? Is it angels? Is it the wise men and the stars? Right? That's what he's saying. Look at these people who fought battles, who stood up to oppressors, who were strong of heart and mind and body, some who were tortured and yet didn't take away their oath, right? They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and the holes in the ground. That's a deep line, right? Are there people who are too good for this world? was Jesus. Verse 39. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. Think about that. They saw a glimpse of God. We know who God's beloved is. They didn't. You are more lucky than them. You have an opportunity. I have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to know something that they did not know. Chapter 12. Therefore, and since we are surrounded by such a huge cloud of witnesses to the life of faith. You've probably heard that line before, the cloud of witnesses. I love that image, right? That if you looked up in the sky, you always see like, that cloud looks like a pig, or that cloud looks like a dragon. What if that cloud looked like the people who came before you? And what if there were thousands of clouds of those people that witnessed before you? Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross. Hold on, I'm going to take a break for a minute. That passage, I've used that passage before. It's one of the great passages, right? That line that, so you got this cloud of witnesses, and I want you to picture this too, another picture. So if you've ever run track, you know that when you run track, you're running for a while where there might be some people cheering on the sides, but you get back around to those bleachers, and then there's a rush of adrenaline as people say your name, and then you run again, and then there's that rush of adrenaline, right? As you're doing these loops. That's what it's like to have faith. Sometimes you are out at the edge of that track, and it's hard, friends. I am there at times, right? And you don't hear anybody calling you. You feel lost and alone, but you keep riding. If you keep running, you're going to get back to those bleachers. You're going to hear those sounds of voices saying, yes, you can do this. That's what it's saying. What if we ran with endurance and didn't see our lives as just sprints? Could we make it through the difficult parts? Because we know that we're coming back around to those moments when people are cheering our name with us, right? The great cloud of witnesses that showed us how to run to begin with. It's a great image. It'll preach. Because of the joy awaited him, Jesus endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in a place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he ended from sinful people, then you won't become weary and give up. After all, you have not given up your lives in your struggle against sin. Man, it's preaching on me. I don't know if it's preaching on you, but them saying, you think you've got it bad on that mid part of that lap when no one's around? Think about Jesus. Think about how hard it was for him. He died for other people's sins. My goodness, the whole world was telling him, crucify him, crucify him. See them screaming at him. No matter what you're facing, it can't be worse than that. And yet he did not give up. He kept running the race. And we can too. 12:5. And have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? So this is what's God say when you get to the bleacher? This is what God says. My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as his child. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. Who ever heard of a child who is never disciplined by its father? If a child doesn't discipline you if God doesn't discipline you as he does all his children, it means that you are illegitimate and are not really his children at all. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how. But God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. We hear that, right? Nobody likes to live in that part of the rough part, the edge of that run, right? It's painful, but afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. And that's not easy. It's not easy to keep running in the midst of challenges. It's not easy to keep running in the midst of discipline, right? Whatever that looks like. It's not easy to keep running when it seems like the world is chasing you, right? But you got to run the race. You got to keep doing the track. And eventually you find yourself right around to it. So take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall but will become strong. When you're running your race, could you lay a path for somebody else to run theirs? When you're struggling with your own trials, whatever they are, could you help somebody else on theirs? Pick them up if you see them fall on the track? Guide them through? We have a new section here on Hebrews 12, verse 14. Mine labels it a call to listen to God. Work at living in peace with everyone, and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. Make sure that no one is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn for a single meal. You know that afterward, when he wanted his father's blessing, he was rejected. It was too late for repentance, even though he begged with bitter tears. You have not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and whirlwind, as the Israelites did at Mount Sinai, for they heard an awesome triumphant blast and a voice so terrible that they begged God to stop speaking. They stagger back under God's command. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. Moses himself was so frightened at the sight that he said, I am terrified and trembling. They're reminding us that no matter what we face, there's some things that were definitely scarier before. And God, in this form, is pretty scary, right? No, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God. So what we face is a different God, right? We don't have to be afraid in that way, right? We don't have to be afraid of the power of God, because the power of God is doing glory for when we walk in the way of the Lord, that glory we receive, right? If you're walking with God, if you're pulling people up on that race to keep going, that's a different mountain that we're going to. You have come to the mountain of Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to countless thousands of angels in a joyful gathering. What if, when you got around the bleachers, there were angels in those bleachers? You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God himself, who is the judge over all things. You have come to the spirits of the righteous ones in heaven. You have now been made perfect. You have come to Jesus. As United Methodists, we say we're going on to perfection, right? So this is a very heavenly chapter. This is one of those chapters that I love to do for funerals. It's going to actually have it down for my funeral. I want Hebrews 12, because this is what it is. It's about life, right? Keep going, keep trying, help others along the way. And where are you headed? You're headed to be with God, into this new world, this new Zion, this new heaven. So Hebrews is saying, yes, God is greater, but here's what you're going to get out of that greatness of God. It's good stuff, right? You have come to the spirits of the righteous ones in heaven. You have now been made perfect. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the new covenant between God and people, and to the sprinkled of blood which speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance like the blood of Abel. Be careful that you do not refuse to listen to the one who is speaking. For the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses. The earthly messenger we will certainly not escape if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. When God spoke from Mount Sinai, his voice shook the earth, but now he makes another promise. Once again I will shake not only the earth, but the heavens also. This means that all of creation will be shaken and removed, so that only unshakable things will remain. Since we are receiving a kingdom that is unshakable, let us be thankful and please God by worshiping him with holy fire and awe, for our God is a devouring fire. Our God is powerful. Our God is strong. Our God is mighty. And yes, when God's full power is shown, that is something to be afraid of. But God is not offering you a sense of fear. God is offering us all a sense of hope, a place of promise, a place of peace. This is a heaven chapter, if there was ever a heaven chapter, right? This Hebrews 12, this notion of what we are living so that we may see. Why do we run the race? Because we know there's a promise yet to be fulfilled. In Hebrews 11, we heard about those who showed us how to run a race, but never got to see what we see. They're not going to get to the end of the finish line. We will. And here's what awaits us. And what a great story, right? So keep running, friends, and don't give up. Amen.